The Kutasichis Chelek Chavdalid, the Sicha of Chag HaSukkos, L'Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin, ben Rabbi Menashe Kaltman, and we are learning L'Schus, our dear friend, Rabbi Yosef Shleima ben Risha, for Refuah Shleima Ukreva. Of course, we know we are entering Zman Simchasenu, the season of joy, the second half of Chodesh Tishrei, and today we're going to discuss what is the ultimate Simcha, how do we reach it, and what are we celebrating on Sukkos. To their Simcha Shebechag HaSukkos Kefinin Mir, with regards to the joy of the Yom Tov of Sukkos, we find as Nesef av dem Chiyuv Simcha was is dem ot varan mitzad Yesa Yom Tov. In addition to the fact of the general joy that is there because it is Yom Tov Bechlal in general, it says V'samachta b'chagecha, that Yom Tov is a time of joy, und Zman Simchasenu b'miyuchad, and specifically the Yom Tov of Sukkos, which is referred to as the season of joy. So in addition to the general joys that in Eichdas Simchais v'chazayne verbunden mit Peulis Mesuyames, was man tut b'Chag HaSukkos, there are specific activities, or specific things that are done on Sukkos that are connected with joy. And the Rebbe is going to name two of them. One, the Simcha was verbunden mit mitzvahs and tilas dalad minim b'Chag Zeh, the Simcha that comes together with the mitzvah of taking the four species on this Yom Tov, you shall take for yourself on the first day. And the pasuk lists the four species, and then the pasuk concludes, and you shall rejoice before Hashem for 7 days. Simchas lulav, indicating that in the mitzvah of lulav there is a unique simcha, a unique joy. Number two, die Simcha was is verbunden mit Nisach HaMayim, the joy that is connected with the pouring of the water, referring specifically to the She'ivas HaMayim, drawing of the water, which was poured over the Mizbeach throughout Sukkos. It was drawn on the night prior to the pouring. Is given besimcha. This she'iva, this drawing, was done with great joy, as the pasuk says, "Ushafte mayim besosin b'mayne Yeshua." You shall draw water with joy from the well springs of salvation. We also know the term simchas beis hashayeva, the joy of the drawing of the water. So the night before the Nisuch HaMayim, there was a special event that entailed the drawing of the water with great joy and the celebration of it, as detailed in the Mishnayos in Masechta Sukkah. They say they're from the zwei Simchas. Welche von sie kommt früher? So which comes first? The lulav or the she'ivas hamayim, the drawing of the water? Is verbunden und hängt up von der Machlekes Tanoim, wenn es hat sich angeben Nisach HaMayim. The order of what comes first will depend on a Machlekes between the two Tanoim. What day did Nisach HaMayim, the pouring of the water, begin? Leit ein day, according to one day, hat der Nisach HaMayim sich angeben am zweiten Tag Sukkos b'Shacharis. The pouring of the water began on the morning of the second day of Sukkos, which in Eretz Yisrael is the first day of Chol Hamoed. Ulefize, and according to this, is the She'ivas HaMayim b'Pam HaRishona given b'Layla HaSheni. So when did they draw the water? The night before, which is the second night of Sukkos. Noch dem Zman von Netilas Daled Minim, was given b'Yom HaRishon, which would be after the first time they did the mitzvah of the four species, which would be on the previous morning. So, for example, if you're going to talk about this year, Erev Sukkos is Wednesday. So Thursday morning, the first day of Sukkos, would be the mitzvah of lulav. Then Thursday night, which is the second night of Sukkos, they would draw the water. And Thursday and Friday morning, the second day of Yom Tov, or the first day of Chol Hamoed, would be the pouring of the water on the Mizbeach. But this means that first came lulav, and then the drawing of the water. Aber the halacha is kedei hashniya. However, the halacha follows the second opinion in the Gemara, as Nisach HaMayim Kol Shiva, that the pouring of the water took place each of the 7 days of Sukkis, Oich B'Yom HaRishon, including day 1 of Sukkis. B'meila is the She'ivas HaMayim Faren Ershten Nisuch Given B'Layla HaRishon Shel Chag, which means that the drawing of the water before the first pouring was the first night. To use the example of this year, the She'ivas HaMayim would be Wednesday night for the pouring of the water that would take place on Thursday morning. But that means that the drawing of the water was far netilas dalad minim vas mitzvah is beyoim, before the taking, before the mitzvah of lulav, which would have been the next morning. So according to the first opinion, first comes lulav, and later that evening is the drawing of the water. According to the second opinion, and that is the halacha, first came the drawing of the water on the first night, and then came lulav on the next morning. So we have two simchas that are uniquely connected with Sukkos, the lulav and Nisach HaMayim, and we have a machlekes, which comes first. In Siv Beis, the Rabbi is going to make the point that even according to the opinion that is not the halacha, that the lulav came before the she'ivas hamayim, before the drawing of the water, that also must have a message for us, because number one, that both opinions brought in Gemara have to have the truth of the fact that it's the word of Hashem. Plus, we're going to see that there's something unique about the second night. L'chol hadayis, everyone agrees that the second night has something unique. Therefore, is verstandig, from this is understood as beide deis haben an art beruchnis, that both opinions have a space in the spiritual realm. Including the opinion that the drawing of the water started on the second night, even though that isn't the halacha, but spiritually it can be teaching us a message. Additionally, even if you follow the halacha that the drawing of the water took place on the first night of Yontif, is aber die Shleimus Hasimcha, but the more complete joy for Simchas Beis She'eva, the Simcha Yeseda, the extra joy of drawing the water, which was accomplished by using the flute and other musical instruments, would have happened on the second night, which was Mitzvah Yom Tov of the first Yom Tov, which means to say that although, even if you follow the opinion that the drawing of the water took place the first night, but the second night would still be a greater joy because you can use musical instruments. And even though the fact that they're not using it on the first night is only for a side reason, meaning to say, technically, if you're celebrating the simcha, it should be the musical instrument should be used the first night also. The only reason we're not using it is the Rabbi uses an expression, the line is blocking it, is not laying on top of it, which means to say, against your will, you can't access it. That the flute or the musical instruments does not override not Shabbos nor Yontif, so you have no choice. You can't use it on the first night. So the Rebbe is going to say, nevertheless, from the fact that it's not being done, teaches us that there's something special at the second night. Before we get to the sphere of this point, the Rebbe adds something about today. In today's day and age, where the Beis Mikdash was destroyed, and we're not doing Simchas Beis HaSheva the way it was done in that time, and therefore we don't need a flute to properly fulfill the mitzvah of Simchas Beis HaSheva, is Yeshlemar v'Gered Kamapamim, one can say, Kalkalaseinu, Zui Takanaseinu. Our problem is actually our greatest fix. Die Simchas Beis HaSheva, we can begin Simchas Beis HaSheva on the first night with full intensity. When Beis Mikdash was standing, so you had to use the instruments. You couldn't use them on the first night, so the second night was greater than the first night. But in today's day, where you don't need instruments to do Simchas Beis HaSheva, so you could already begin Simchas Beis HaSheva on the first night with the same shturim, with the same intensity as you'll have the second night. So this was a parenthetical to point out that today we don't need the Chalil. And therefore, the first day of Yantiv, we don't have the blockage that it's not being done properly, and that we can do it properly the first night already. And gerade in this year, the Sichos from the Fabrengen of Leil Beis, the Chag HaSukkos, Tavshim Aleph, and that was the year when the Rebbe took the idea of Simchas B'Sheva to the next level, encouraging the Simcha throughout every single night of Sukkos on a whole new level. Let's go back into the Sikha. So even though the whole reason you're not playing the instruments is only because you're not allowed to, and not because it's technically not part of the process, Afal PK, nevertheless, since everything in Torah is perfect, is precise, is moving a does was the Simcha Yeseda in Migdash. From the fact that we see that the extra joy, the additional joy in the Beis Hamikdash began on the second night, is a sterfar was is mer masim zum Teichen von der Simcha. It's because that's how it's supposed to be. As the Simcha Yeseda v'zizgen b'mikdash can zayin lamitasa b'mitzvah yom tov l'acharav. That the true joy, the extra joy, can only really take place on the second night of Sukkot and after that. It's a little hard to understand where the Rebbe is going with this without having learned the rest of the Sikha. But in Sif Beis, the Rebbe is making a point, and that is the halacha is, as he said in Sif Aleph, that you start drawing the water on the first night. Nevertheless, A, there's an opinion that you would start on the second night. B, even according to the opinion that you start on the first night, there is still something special about the second night. Which means that in a way there is something special about the drawing of the water that comes after the mitzvah of Lulav that morning. And we have to explore and understand what is unique about the second night. The dafke after Lulav, you can have Shiva Samayim with a Simcha Yeseda. That's really where the Rebbe is taking us. The Rebbe wants to ultimately point out to us that the ultimate joy of Simchas B'Sheva is after Lulav. And even according to the opinion that you do it before Lulav, but the full-fledged form of joy is after the Lulav, the second night, and that's what's going to be the theme where the Rebbe is going to build through the Sikha to get to the point of why is the second night, in a certain sense, greater than the first night. So in Sif Gimel, the Rebbe is going to begin to explain to us the connection between the idea of pouring water, Nisach HaMayim, and Sukkos. In order to understand what is so special about the second night of Sukkos, we have to first understand why Bechlal is Nisach HaMayim connected to Sukkos. So first we have to explain what's the difference between Nisach HaMayim and Nisach HaYayin. Throughout the whole year, whenever there was certain karbanos were brought, there was Nisachim. Wine was poured over the Mizbeach. That's Nisach HaYayin. Sukkos was unique that it had Nisach HaMayim, pouring of water. What is it, and how does it connect to Sukkos? Einer von den Chilukim zwischen der Simcha von Nisach HaYayin, der ein Oim im Shira El HaYayin, und die Simcha von Nisach HaMayim. What is one of the differences between the Simcha at pouring of the water, a pouring of the wine, versus the Simcha of pouring the water? The Simcha von Nisach HaYayin is verbunden nicht mit Teva Adam. The pouring of the wine, the joy that comes with pouring of the wine, is connected with human nature. Bedugma zu der Simcha was kommt von Yayin Stam. Just like there's a joy from wine, not pouring the wine, but from drinking wine. The far was yayin is beteva davar masameach. Yayin contains a component that causes joy naturally. Even though by pouring of the wine, it's actually a holy joy. You're doing a mitzvah. Is verbunden mit the Beis Hamikdash, is connected with serving Hashem in the Beis Hamikdash. Doch hat sie shaykhis mit teva adam. Nevertheless, it's connected with human nature. Human nature gets joy from drinking wine. In the brackets, the Rebbe is going to focus a little bit how a yid, even when he does something that has a natural component, as a yid, it actually you focus on the spiritual aspect of it. Similar, for example, when it comes to the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov, which connects with actually drinking wine, and Simcha as Chazal tell us that one of the ways to generate joy is through wine. is doch die Shtiyas hayayin von Aiden nitzli shem taibe chas v'shalom. So when a Yid drinks wine on Yontif, it's not because of the temptation in the wine. The wine, he desires it. Not to live mikima mitzvah. He's drinking wine in order to fulfill the mitzvah of being besimcha. Ubemele is echt die simcha was kum durch dem. So therefore, the simcha that comes from drinking the wine, it's not from the wine itself, like by someone else, a guy who would just drink wine for the sake of the joy. No, the simcha of a yid when drinking wine on Yantif is coming from the fact that it's a mitzvah. Simcha shel mitzvah. Is the mitzvah. But nevertheless, that I was going to say in a moment, it still connects with the fact that naturally wine causes that joy. But just to keep on this theme of the fact that when a Yid does something, he does it because of the holiness and because of the mitzvah. Eden seinen goy echad ba'aretz. The pasuk says the Yidden are one nation in the land. Das heißt, so Chassidus explains, as euch mitzadem gufa gashmi eretz, that even from the perspective of eretz, earth, from the physical body, there's still a nation of echad, of oneness. And a goy kaddish, and a holy nation. Was der fun is move on, as echt die simcha was der jüdische guf der viel dan, nimmt sich beemes von der tusche mit shabayin. So when a yiddish guf feels joy, even though the wine has a natural element of joy to it, but the simcha that the yid, even the guf of the yid, feels on Yontif is coming from the fact that he's doing a mitzvah of being besimcha. Afal pikein, but nevertheless, let's be realistic. Since this joy is connected with wine, and we know that wine generates joy. The atam b'pshat ha'Torah is whether it's betivim eir b'simcha. And in a literal sense, what does mean in simcha lebayayin? That wine has the natural component to generate joy. Is move on as the simcha mitzad mitzvah hatashayches to teva u'metzias elam teva hayayin. So even though what's causing the joy of the yid is the mitzvah that he's doing, but it still shares some element of the fact that naturally speaking, that the nature of the world is that wine causes joy. So when you talk about nisach hamayim, nisach hayayin, the same thing. The fact that wine has the ability to create joy, so even though when a yid pours when the kohen pours the wine over the mizbeach, the simcha is coming from the mitzvah that he's serving Hashem in the Beis Hamikdash, but it still includes the fact that wine has a natural component that generates joy. So it's a limited joy to the limits of nature. Whereas the joy that comes from pouring water over the Mizbeach, which would take place on Sukkos, water by nature does not have this component that it generates joy. This shows that the joy of the drawing of the water has no connection to the natural elements in the water. It is coming solely because Hashem commanded, you shall draw water with joy. So when you see a person pouring wine and he's besimcha, you could say, yeah, wine creates simcha. But when you see a person pouring water, you know that the simcha is coming only from Hashem's command. And this is the advantage of the pouring of the water over the pouring of the wine. But by the pouring of the wine, because it has some dependency on nature, it becomes limited, confined to the confines of nature. Whereas when it comes to the pouring of the water, the joy is coming entirely from the Eibishter's commandment. Which the Eibishter is infinite. So also the simcha is higher than any limitations. So the maila of nisach hamayim, the advantage of nisach hamayim, pouring the water over the pouring of the wine, is that the pouring of the wine is a finite, a limited joy, and the pouring of the water is an infinite, unlimited joy. Before we continue with regards to Sukkos, Sif Dalet, the Rebbe is going to say how this concept of Nisach HaMayim versus Nisach HaYayin applies to the person's avodah. It is well known that every Yid has a spiritual altar. Is move on as the simcha for Nisach HaYayin and Nisach HaMayim. So according to this, we will understand that these two levels, these two layers of joy, one generated through pouring of the wine and one generated through pouring of the water, can also be explained in a Yid's spiritual avodah. The simcha for Nisach HaYayin meant b'avedas adam. The joy that comes from pouring of the wine means in the person's avodah. A simcha shel mitzvah velcharkum durch hizbarnus b'seichel. A simcha of a mitzvah, but the simcha is generated through the person's intellectual contemplation and reflection. When he thinks about the great privilege that he has, but the Rebbe gegeben the Möglichkeit zum Mekayim seiner Mitzvah, the Rebbe gave him this opportunity to do a mitzvah. And when a Yid contemplates about the great accomplishment that is done through his mitzvah, as a Wert durch der Mitzvah, betzafse und dobuk mit Neibishten, that they're doing the mitzvah, he becomes connected and bound with Hashem. This generates by the person a great joy. Person thinks about it, he realizes how special it is that he could do a mitzvah, how great is the accomplishment of this mitzvah, he feels joy. However, since this joy is based on his contemplation, his intellect, is he in anefen as in ihr herzich nesef after mitzvah euch die mitzias von dem adam mekayim mitzvah. What happens is that in this joy, what one sees, one realizes, besides the fact that it's a mitzvah, you also feel the fact that there's a person here that's fulfilling the mitzvah. It's his contemplation, it's his reflection that is bringing about this joy. Similar to the simcha that comes from wine, that is also dependent on the fact that wine creates joy. So that's point number one. Point number one, the person's mitzias is felt. And the second point, as the simcha is murkeves ba'asaga, since the simcha is based on his understanding, so now the simcha is limited to the level of his understanding. He will only be as joyful as his intellect appreciates. So that's Laved and Nisach HaYayin. Nisach HaYayin, on the one hand, the person reflects and understands that he should be happy. But because of that, A, his mitzias is still there, and B, the simcha goes only as far as his intellect appreciates. Whereas if the simcha that comes from pouring of the water is a dugma from a simcha mitzvah, this is an example of a simcha that comes from doing a mitzvah, but that transcends the person's seichel, that transcends intellect, transcends the person's contemplation. When a Yid is in a mode of Mesidas Nefesh, of sacrifice, he is totally dedicated to Hashem. He doesn't have to depend on explaining it logically, what he's accomplishing through the mitzvah. As soon as he realizes that this is a commandment from Hashem, immediately this generates a great joy. And unlike the simcha that came from the wine, that was a limited simcha, and that was where the person's mitzias is realized, here it's a true joy, which has no limitations. Because this joy reaches to the essence of the soul that transcends the faculties such as seichel and midas. And therefore, about this kind of joy, the joy of the pouring of water, Chazal say, that one who has not experienced or seen, actually, the joy of the drawing of the water has never seen joy in his life. Because the ultimate joy is when it's not dependent on seichel, and when it's not about the person, when it's about the person's total dedication to Hashem, about the essence of the Yid. So this is this is the contrast between Nisach HaMayim and Nisach HaYayin. When you talk about the actual Nisach HaMayim and Nisach HaYayin is connected with the fact that wine has elements of joy, and therefore it's still considered a limited to the rule, to the confines of nature, whereas Nisach HaMayim has no elements of joy in it, and it's only the joy of the mitzvah. And in Avedis Adam, it refers to the simcha that comes from a mitzvah that has to be generated through hisbaranus, through contemplation, through using one's logic, one's intellect, versus Nisach HaMayim, which is the ultimate joy that is not based on the person's intellect, but based on his mesiras nefesh, on his total dedication to Hashem. So now that we understand what Nisach HaMayim is, that Nisach HaMayim, and to actually look back for a moment to the end of Sif Gimel, when Nisach HaMayim was di simcha kumt kula mitzat tzivei kadosh baruch hu was as ein soif, is oich di simcha l'mayla mitzvah v'agbala, that Nisach HaMayim represents joy that is infinite and unlimited. Now we'll understand the connection between the Nisach HaMayim and Sukkos, which we asked in the beginning of Sif Gimel. What's the connection between Nisach HaMayim and Sukkos? Das is Sifhei. Das is echt die klolite Gescheichis von Simchas B'Shevet Chag HaSukkos, and this explains the general connection between the drawing of the water and Sukkos. And Rebbe introduces a very important nekuda here, well known and discussed at length in Chassidus, that Sukkos is actually a revelation of what took place in the Avodah of Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur. Die Simcha von Sukkos Masim Chaseinu kommt von der Avede Vinyanim was haben sich aufgetan bei Rosh Hashanah und Messias mit Tshuva und Rabbi Yom Kippurim. The Simcha of Sukkos comes based on or following all of the Avede that was done, that was accomplished Rosh Hashanah, the Messias mit Tshuva, and specifically Yom Kippur. Uki Yadua, as it is known, as it is explained in Chassidus, as the inyan von Schach HaSukkah, v'chakum von Anani HaKavod, the idea of the Schach that covers the Sukkah, that originates from the idea of the clouds of glory that protected and surrounded the Yidden in the Midbar, v'et nimshich von der Tshuva un Anan HaKteres v'Yom Kippurim. It comes from the tshuva and the cloud. Notice the cloud. There were the clouds of glory, and there were the cloud of the Ketores that was brought on Yom Kippur. So the cloud of the Ketores represents tshuva, and the cloud of glory is represented in the sukkah. So the sukkah is the same idea as Yom Kippur. In other places in Chassidus, it explains on the pasuk Bakesel Yom Chagenu that those things that are concealed in the Avodah of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when it comes to Yom Chagenu, when it comes to Sukkos, it's revealed. So Sukkos is a revelation of what was being accomplished during the previous Yom Tovim and Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur. The Rebbe explains the Aveda of Yom Kippur, Achas B'Shana, Sadichidus B'Nefesh. Aveda of Yom Kippur, which is called Achas B'Shana, one day a year, one time a year, the oneness of the year, that is on the level of Yechidus B'Nefesh. The Iskashrus von Etzman Neshama Mitzmusi Yisbarach, the bond, the connection between the essence of the Neshama and the essence of Hashem, Yechida Liyachtach, the Yechida, the essence of the person's Neshama, which proclaims the oneness, which recognizes the oneness of Hashem. That is Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, we transcend to the highest level. There's 5 tefillas Yom Kippur, representing the 5 levels of the neshama. We're reaching the level of Yechida, as Yechida connects to the essence of Hashem. And the rufta from Sukkos is, then comes Sukkos, and what Sukkos accomplishes, as di hiskashrus, that this hiskashrus, this transcendent bond between the essence of the soul and the essence of Hashem, which we experienced, or which we can reach on Yom Kippur, so nimshich werden begolui bis zu arumenem in dem Eden in ganzen mit alle seine inyanim, should be drawn down into a revealed space, so that it can encompass the Yid and everything that comes with him. And this is actually expressed in the mitzvah of Sukkah. You shall sit in the Sukkah for 7 days. So the Chazal tell us, Teishu kein taduru. It doesn't mean just to sit, it means to dwell in the Sukkah. All the things that he might do in his house, such as achila, shtia, v'chulu, eating, drinking, etc. All of a sudden, they are surrounded, they are encompassed, they are embraced with the mitzvah of Sukkah. So on Yom Kippur, we were fasting, and you were staying in shul, and you were dressed up like a malach, and you were in this transcendent space. On Sukkot, you take that that hiskashrus with Hashem, that bond with Hashem, and you bring it down into your eating, into your drinking, into your whole life, that even in the mundane life, you should be able to connect to Hashem on this transcendent level. So Sukkos is the ultimate l'mayla midid of Agbala. Sukkos, you're taking the Yechidish Benefesh and you're bringing it down into your everyday life. So we said before, Nisach HaMayim is l'mayla midid of Agbala, and we said or l'mayla mitam vadas. And now we understand that Sukkos is also l'mayla midid of Agbala. You're taking the Yechidah and you're bringing it down into this world. This is why Sukkos is the time for pouring of the water and for the joy of the drawing of the water. Which is a supra-rational joy, as we explained earlier, that Mayim doesn't have its own joy element. The joy is coming totally because Hashem said so, which means that it's beyond our understanding or comprehension. Because it is Sukkos that is able to generate this infinite simcha. Because Sukkos is the whole idea of Sukkos is to bring down the Yechidah into the person's life. So once we explained what Mayim is, that Mayim is a simcha shalamayim mitavadas, we understand how it connects to Sukkos, because Sukkos is a time of simcha shalamayim mitavagbala, because you're bringing down the Yechidah into a space that is the Golui. So Yechidah is l'mayim mitavagbala, and Yom Kippur it remains over there. Sukkos, it comes down into the person's everyday life. So therefore, Sukkot is a time of l'mayla midid of Agbala. Therefore, it's a perfect time to experience the simcha of Nisach HaMayim, which is a supra-rational simcha. Now we got to go back to Lulav. The whole simcha began with what comes first, Lulav or Simchas Pesach She'eva. Now we understand what Nisach HaMayim is, and we understand its connection with Sukkos. Now we have to understand, before we can know what comes first, we have to understand what role does Lulav play in this event. It's known in Sivav as the mitzvah from Lulav is beteichen anitkim as under mitzvah v'darf kitam v'erin in the zman von zayim HaSukkos. And the mitzvah of Lulav is not a separate mitzvah, a removed mitzvah that happens to be that it's being done during the time of Sukkos. We had a sikha on this. I think it was a Parshas Emer Chelek Chav Beis. The Rebbe talks at length to explain this concept. What's the main mitzvah? What you might think is a secondary mitzvah. The point over there is that the mitzvah of Lulav, the mitzvah of Lulav is intrinsically connected to Sukkos. As understood from the din, that the mitzvah to shake the lulav is done in the best possible way is when it's done in the sukkah, because lulav and sukkah are intrinsically connected. What's the connection? Sukkah nimmt rein in sich dem Iden mit alle seine Inyonim beöfen as iringelt sehr nur bechutz. We said before that the sukkah takes the Yechidah Benefesh, the connection of Yechidah with the Eibishter, and it affects the person's everyday life. But the way it does it is in a way that it encompasses it from the outside. Makif, as Chassidus uses the word makif. The sukkah is makif. It surrounds, it encompasses the person like a garment. A garment, it says something about the person, but the person cannot ingest the garment. The garment is a makif. Und der Uftu von Mitzvahs and Tilas Dalad Minim is, the Uftu, the accomplishment of the Mitzvah of Dalad Minim and the Mitzvah of Lulav and the four species, is ulekachtem lochem, you take it for yourself. Der makif from Sukkah, ver genumen lochem, the makif from the Sukkah becomes personalized. Vert ayer becomes yours. As vert nimshich in apnimius, it's drawn down into the inside of the person. Like food one can ingest, and that's on the one hand it's in smaller amounts because it has to fit inside the person, but on the other hand it actually fits inside of the person. It's much more personalized. A garment can be taken off this person and put onto another person, but food can't be taken out of one person and put inside of another person. So you have makif, you have pnimi. The sukkah encompasses the person on a makif level, which means that its taka affects, yes, he eats there, he drinks there, etc., but it hasn't totally transformed the person, because it's only surrounding him, which is why, as we'll see in a moment, the person can go into the sukkah with all of his baggage, etc., etc. The lulav, the mitzvah of lulav is to affect the inside of the person, to change the person. And that's the advantage of the lulav. The lulav takes, so you have Yom Kippur, you have the Yechidush B'Nefesh. Sukkah takes the Yechidush B'Nefesh, the bond of Yechidush B'Nefesh with the Eibishter, and it brings it down into the person, but it remains only as a makif. Comes the mitzvah of lulav, and it takes this bond with Hashem, the essential bond with Hashem, that until this point was only on a makif level, and it brings it b'pnimius. But thus is the town was by that in Tilif and Dalad Minim, Darfman ze zuleg and Sumarz, which is which is the reason why when we shake the lulav, we make the nanuim, we bring the Dalad Minim back to our heart, so that their message, that their theme should actually affect the feelings in the heart. And then the heart distributes it in all the directions. And then from the heart it goes into all parts of the body, including to the mind, including to the intellectual faculties. So that's the process. Coming from Yom Kippur, Sukkot brings it down to a level of makif, and lulav brings it down into a pnimius. Und dafke durch dem is der inyan von Sukkot gili makif b'shleimus. And only once this makif comes into the pnimius is the revelation of the makif complete. Chotch. As the Aved v'Zakeches pnimim is b'midah, even though generally speaking, when you bring along your personal kaiches, namely seichel and midas, it limits it, because you can only go as far as your seichel, you can only go as far as your midas. But the far from which is why usually we say that it's not enough to serve Hashem with seichel and midas. You need mesidus nefesh, which transcends the limitations of seichel. As we said before about wine and water, the wine is limited because it's based on the person's simcha versus the water that is higher than seichel. Afal pikein is the shleimus aveda from mesidus nefesh. Wenn der bittel mesidus nefesh nem durch die keches pnimium seichel midis as eich zeizol mechayis and in mesidus nefesh. Nevertheless, the most perfect form of mesidus nefesh is when it permeates the person's personal kaiches, his seichel and his midis, his intellect and his emotions, that they too should require mesidus nefesh. In other words, usually mesidus nefesh and seichel are opposites. Seichel says you want to live. You want to do what makes sense. Mesidus nefesh doesn't make sense. So generally speaking, we say that mesidus nefesh is a conflict to seichel. Says the Rebbe over here that the ultimate mesidus nefesh is when even the seichel and the midas agree that mesidus nefesh is necessary, which is really an incongruent situation, because seichel by definition should say that you can't have mesidus nefesh. But nevertheless, when you reach the ultimate mesidus nefesh impacts even the seichel and the midas. Varum. Why is that the most perfect mesidus nefesh when seichel and midas get on board? First of all, that's how it becomes internalized in the person, and therefore has a chance of survival. Now, there's a lot of times a person thinks, theoretically, I'm ready for mesidus nefesh. But when the push comes to shove, he's not ready to make the move, because it was an idea that he could sign up to. But then when it comes to implementation, he's seichel midas, block it. So when you're able to, for the mesidus nefesh to permeate seichel midas, then it actually affects the person in a real way. This proves how unlimited, how infinite mesidus nefesh is. As it's nitokin ortin nefesh was durchgenommen. There's nowhere in the person's soul that mesidus nefesh doesn't bittel and mesidus nefesh don't reach, even seichel midas. The seichel midas are sometimes contrary to bittul and mesidus nefesh, but bittul and mesidus nefesh are so powerful that they could even convince seichel and midas to be ready for mesidus nefesh. So the sukkah goes to the lulav completes the avodah of the sukkah. The sukkah is to bring down Yechidah Shebenefesh, the Yechidah Liyachdach into the person, but it can only do so as a makif. If it's only a makif, then you don't know how it's going to affect a person, and it limits the Mesiras Nefesh. And then, when you have the mitzvah of lulav brings this makif into a pnimius, which internalizes and personalizes the Mesiras Nefesh, and it makes it to be totally and completely unlimited. So that's the role of lulav. So the nisach hamayim is the union of simcha shalom mitamadas. It connects with sukkahs because sukkahs is also the ma'alim mididav agbala. It reaches the level of yechidah liyachdach and brings it down into the person's life. But then you also have the union of lulav, which lulav is the bringing the makiv into a pnimius, and which makes it much more personal and makes it much more infinite. Now we can go back to the two opinions. And we'll start with the first opinion. The first opinion said that lulav comes first, and then that night is Shiva Samayim. The second night is the drawing of the water, and on the next morning, the second day, is Nisach Hamayim. So now that we understand this process, it's going to make a lot of sense. At first you need lulav, and then you could reach the ultimate simcha. Wenn ich verstehen, dem Tampnimi von der Dea als Shiva Samayim mit Simchas Vesjeva häupt sich an die zweite Nacht von Sukkis, according to this we'll understand the opinion, the deeper, the pneumistic reason, the deeper reason. Why, according to the first opinion, you have to draw the water only after you've done the mitzvah of the Daled Minim. Geschehen, wie die Shtemos Aveda von Mesiras Nefesh Bechlal. Just like we said that the Mesiras Nefesh is most perfect. When the Mesiras Nefesh permeates even the person's internal koiches, seichel amidos, certainly this can be said about the simcha, the joy that is generated by the Aveda of Mesiras Nefesh, that when it permeates into the Koiches Pnimiyim, into the person's Seichel Umidis, then the joy is much more complete. Hayos Aleph being that, number one, as it's Eridus HaSimcha is Davke von Azach was Vert Nigis Begolui. To be able to feel joy, you have to feel something. The fact that theoretically you're at a place of Mesiras Nefesh is not enough. But when your Seichel understands it and your Midas feel the readiness for Mesiras Nefesh, you're feeling something. This generates joy. Joy is a feeling. It has to come from something that you actually feel. Unbeis, another point. Simcha amitis is when sie hat nit kein agbalis. True simcha is when there are no limitations. The shleimus hasimcha von anin shel ma'alim hasagas seichel shalei, the ultimate joy from something that's beyond his comprehension is when der inyan very genommen nit nur b'chinas makif. No darf when kommt up and apnimius. If the thing remains in the makif, then you don't know how it's going to affect him on a deeper level. And therefore, the simcha is limited. So you give a person a candy, if they like candy, and makes them happy. But it's not real happiness, because as soon as the candy is finished, the happiness is gone. True happiness is to come from something that's eternal. So if the Mesiras Nefesh is not eternal because it hasn't reached into the Pnimius, then the Simcha isn't real. It's limited Simcha. So therefore, the ultimate Simcha comes Davke once the Makif is brought down into the Pnimius, because then he can start feeling things, and that will generate joy. And then it's a true joy, because once it goes into the Pnimius, it is eternal. Der Mites move on. Was the Simcha of Shiva Samayim, therefore is understood that the joy of the drawing of the water, welche is beteichen or der Teichen von der Simcha was kommt von Inyan HaSukkah Kanal Sifei, which is the same concept as Sukkos. As we said in Sifei, that the Nisach HaMayim is l'maylim we did in Tamatas, and Sukkah is l'maylim we did of Agbala. So the idea of Sukkah and the idea of Nisach HaMayim is the same concept, this infinite, unlimited joy. So it's understood now that this can happen, die zweite Nacht von Sukkos, noch der Arbeit von der Kacht nach that it can only truly take place on the second night of Sukkos, after the mitzvah of Lulav. As the Maki von Sukkos, the mitzvah of Lachem in Apnimi is after the year accomplished, through the mitzvah of Daled Minim, to draw down the level of Makif into the Pnimius of the Yid, Lochem. It became one with a person. Then later that night, the person could affect himself, to draw water with supra-rational joy. The Aveda of Mesidus Nefesh on the Ma'alim HaSeichel, nem durch alles eine Keches Pnimiyim, that the Aveda of Mesidus Nefesh, that's higher than Seichel, permeates all of his internal Keches, Seichel Amidus, Me'eir HaSimcha Amitis Ugluya, and therefore generates a true and revealed Simcha. So the process makes perfect sense according to the first opinion. First, you have to have Lulav, which is drawing down the Makif and the Pnimi. Once you have the Makif and the Pnimi, then you have the Mesidus Nefesh that permeated the entire person. Then the Simcha is real and true. Then you can go that night and draw the water Mimayne Yeshua for the Nisuch HaMayim, and that is the full embodiment of the truest, most form of joy, because you already had the Makif and the Pnimi. So this helps us understand the Maila of the second night, and why, according to the first opinion, you need to have the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva to happen first on the second night, after you've brought down the Makif Pnimi and brought the person to the ultimate Simcha. In Sif Ches, the Rebbe is going to explain the second opinion, which is the halacha. In that case, why taka is there an opinion, and why taka do we paskin la halacha that Simchas Beis HaShe'eva is on the first night? That's what the Rebbe is going to explain in Sif Ches. At the end of the day, even though you don't have the pnimi yet, but once you have the makiv, some joy has to be generated. You have to begin some level of joy, because you already have the yechida liyachdach, it's taka and a makiv, but you can't say there's no joy till the second night. Oh, but Afal Pikin is the halacha. As ich beim Rishon Sukkos is going to Chamayim. Mainly is Fardim given Shivas Hamayim. But according to the halacha, on the first day of Sukkos there was the pouring of the water, which means before that, the night before, there was the drawing of the water. We bald as Dav Tanu Shafta Mayim Besasna. And since the drawing of the water has to be with joy, is move on as Eich Di Shiv is Gemet Asimcha Muteris. It's understood that also the drawing of water on the first night was with a simcha, albeit a permissible simcha, meaning not with instruments, but farta simcha. How do you explain that? Warum? Yes, as ich fahren kiem und kachte von ersten Tag von Leila Rishon. Ich schein da der Ruf von Chag HaSukkos beginnes Makiv. Since from the very first even before the fulfillment of Ulakachte, before you've done the mitzvah of Lulav, in the very first moment of the first night of Sukkos, you already have the Chag of the Sukkah, the level of Makiv. But this is the Sibut to the Simchas Yom Tov the next Nach, which is the reason why in the first night there is joy, because Nach Sukkos, the first night of Sukkos is joy because you already have the Yechida Liyachtach in a Makiv. The Ribber is Eich Demol Shaykh Tininya for Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. So really and truly you can already begin this Simchas Beis HaShe'eva so sein Simcha von Shivos Ubchinas Mayim Shamal Mesagas HaSeichel. Even though you didn't do the mitzvah of Lulav yet, but still at least on a level of makif, the simcha began, and because it began on a level of makif, you could already have simcha, even simcha that's higher than seichel, from the drawing of the water. Nor, while the inyan HaSukkah is not b'chinas makif. Since at the end of the day, sukkah is still only on the level of makif. Therefore, is oich di demol tika simcha nitkin shtein b'zdika. So therefore, the simcha of the first night is not complete. Unita ze begolu and not so revealed. Dafke noch der Aveda von Netilas Dal Minimum. Then after the Aveda of Netilas Dal Minimum, will lekachtem lochem, when you take it for yourself, am shachas am akif epnimius, is the simchas v'sheva with the ganzen shturim. Then the joy of the drawing of the water can be with full intensity, mit chalil and andere klesher, with the flute and other musical instruments, goes to the next level. So if you go back to Siv Beis, you see that the Rebbe is emphasizing the second night. Either according to the first opinion that it first began on the second night, or according to the second opinion that it began on the first night, but the second night was more intense than the first night. Why? Because at the end of the day, the strongest simcha is after the amshacha of the makif into a pnimius. So, according to the first opinion, they say you have to have lulav first. You can't begin with simcha of nisacham of shiva samayim until you have the mitzvah of lulav makif b'pnimius. Says the second opinion, which is the halacha, that you could start the joy earlier, because at least you have the makif of sukkah, and that's enough to generate the beginning of joy. But the ultimate joy is on the second night. Keep in mind that this sicha is being said on the second night of Sukkos, and the Rebbe is explaining how the second night of Sukkos is so unique. It's an even greater joy, according to both opinions. It's a greater joy than the first night. Siftes, the Rebbe brings it down to us, into our everyday life, in, unfortunately, Zman HaGolus. May the Eibishter help that by the time it comes to Sukkot this year, we should be celebrating in the Beis HaMikdash together with the Rebbe. The meeting of verstehen, was it's the Zman HaGolus is coming against the Besoll bekam Mekaymes, the Aschala von Simchas Besoll, in the erste Nacht von Sukkot. This will also explain to us why today, now that we're in Golos, the minig is, so the custom amongst Jewish people is to begin Simchas Besoll even on the first night of Sukkot. The main idea, the main possibility of drawing down the level of makif into a pnimius, into an internal personal level, it was mostly, primarily during the time of the Beis Hamikdash. When godliness shine down in a revealed way and in a personal way. And then we served Hashem with our Seichel Amidus. We were able to feel and understand godliness, and then we were able to serve Hashem on that level. So therefore, there was a possibility of the mamshech makif pnimius. However, in the time of Galus, when we don't see the miracles, is the aschalus v'akdamas ha'aveda nitev hazeifim with the keches pnimium. When we do our aveda, at least when we start off the aveda, it's not so much being done with our internal keches seichel amidus. That ikir aveda v'aschalasim is ha'mesidus nefesh v'keches makifim. We begin our aveda on a mesidus nefesh level, on a level that doesn't. The Mesidus Nefesh, obviously before it affected the Keches Pnimiyim. Where you're still in the Keches Makifim, you're still more on an external level. With Pashtus, Al Yevis V'Pnei Maligim, to not be ashamed from the scoffers. Have the Az Kanomer, to be bold as a leopard. Knesher Chulu, Katzvi Chulu, Kari Chulu. Maybe say Chol Adam. These ideas, be bold as a leopard, to be strong as a lion, doesn't make sense al pi seichel. It's a conduct that transcends seichel. That's the Aveda of Galus. Today we can't really truly appreciate the advantage of the second night. The second night you really have the makif pnimius, which is being done, accomplished through the mitzvah of lulav. But today in Galus we can't experience it, we can't feel it so much. The advantage of the second night over the first night. And therefore, for us, we don't have to wait for the second night. We can start the simcha on the first night. That's the minik Yisrael b'kam v'kaimis, or b'chol makim. The minik Yisrael b'chol makim, I would understand that we start the first night because what's the point of waiting for the second night? Bisman hagolus, the makif pipnimi is not really something that's on our wavelength. So why wait till the second night if we can't really appreciate it anyway? We might as well begin on the first night. No, says Alon Yonah von Teres and Nitzchim. However, since everything in Torah is eternal, we still have to somehow express the greatness of the second night over the first night. How do we do that in Zman HaGalus, in the Geidul HaSimcha Gufa, in the extent of the joy? We intensify the joy of the second night. Because from the Simcha from the Aleph, it should be greater than the Simcha of the first night. When it comes to the second night, it's as if we're starting now. The simcha of the second night is so much greater than the first night that it's as if the first night didn't even happen. So on the first night we start with simcha because there's no point to wait to the second night, because we're not really going to understand the whole concept of amshachas hamakif epnimius. But then when it comes to the second night, since bisman habayis, the second night was so much greater. So therefore, what we do is we intensify the simcha so much, so great that it's as if it's the first night. Aber, high time a gufa. But now we just said lelecheda in this Zman HaBayis was a higher level because we were able to experience keches pnimiyim, and now in Golus we can't experience keches pnimiyim. May high time a gufa. Kum tuisas is done ilui in simchas beis hasheva b'zman habayis b'zman hazeh l'gabe simchas beis hasheva b'zman habayis, that in a sense there is an advantage in our simchas beis hasheva over the simchas beis hasheva that would take place in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. Kashem visas mavur ben against the inyan amseres nefesh atzmei as b'zman hagolus when says nitoif as eifol the giluf and keches pnimiyim is there keach amseres nefesh mer begoli b'zman habayis, just as it's explained in various places in Chassidus that in the time of Golus, when you don't have the gili of keches pnimiyim, the keach hamesidus nefesh is stronger. In other words, when in Bizman HaBayis, when they're able to see Elokos, experience Elokos, they could serve Hashem with Seichel Amidus in a perfect manner. In Golos, we can't do that. We can't really truly experience Hashem with Elokos, with Seichel Amidus. So therefore, the Mesidus Nefesh is much more powerful with Zman HaGolos. We're serving Hashem with Mesidus Nefesh. The same thing could be applied to the Simcha. But the Simcha for Nusach HaMayim Kinal is Bizman HaGolus and the Hecher the Simcha Mitzad Etzem HaNefesh. In the time of the Beis HaMikdash, the Simcha of the Simcha of Beis Simcha She'eva was Hamshachas HaMakiv, the way it came down into the Pnimius. So therefore, it was the way a person understood it and felt it. Today we can't do that. We don't have that advantage. So the Simcha is on the level of Etzem HaNefesh. So in a sense, Take, it doesn't permeate us as it did with Manabayis, but the joy, it comes from a much, much higher place. It comes from the Etzem HaNefesh, and in that way there's a Maila in the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva of Zman HaGolus, which is Etzem HaNefesh, Lagabe the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva of Zman HaBayis, which was from the Keches Pnimim of Seichel Umidus.